So Russia has created their own dedicated drone unit, and so far, it's pretty effective. Rather than going after Ukrainian infantry and artillery, they're prioritizing attacking communications and logistics targets. So today we're diving into the Russian Rubicon Group. Their new drone unit stood up directly in response to the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces. We'll get into a little background, the organization's structure, and then a direct comparison of strikes last month as documented by the Rubicon Group and Ukraine's USF. Now, as a little background here, this group just passed their 1-year anniversary, so they're not brand new, not by a long shot, and they've been pretty effective up in the Kursk region when Ukraine was in Russian territory, and we're seeing them used more and more now, not just in Sumy, but Pokrovsk and Velkonovoselka in the south. But last October, Russian Channel 1 News put out a little piece discussing Rubicon, where they said, quote, "The Russian defense minister inspected the work of the Rubicon Center for Advanced Unmanned Technologies, and based on the results of the visit, the defense minister ordered the creation of 5 more units, one for each group of our troops. The existing Rubicon units have proven their exceptional effectiveness. The number of targets destroyed by them in the war zone is in the hundreds. They also use drones with elements of artificial intelligence." Now, they've come a long ways since that report in October, but something I want you to keep in mind as we're going through this is the new types of drone warfare we've seen come out over the course of this war. And what we're seeing more and more is that a lot of this on the Russian side is starting here with this Rubicon unit. A great example, wire-guided or fiber optic drones. If you recall, when those first came out on the battlefield, it was almost exclusively in the Kursk region. It's these guys. They are getting the most advanced technology. They're getting the priority funding, the priority equipment, the priority for personnel. So we're seeing the most innovative use of drone technology, starting with Rubicon and then spreading elsewhere. Now, Sam Bennett over on X shared a post from the Rubicon Group, their Telegram channel. Actually, I'll have both Sam's account and then the Rubicon Telegram account linked in the description below if you want to check either one of those out. But going directly to Rubicon, from the horse's mouth about their organization. They say today is Rubicon's first anniversary. The main achievement of the center is not a quantitative or technical improvement, but an organizational one. They say previously a drone operator in the Russian armed forces was simultaneously an operator, an engineer, a sapper, and a recon officer, but in Rubicon all of these functions are separated. The operator basically only controls the drone that is being prepared for him. And this is how we have seen the drone units kind of adapt over the course of this war. There were not drone units in 2022 when the full-scale invasion began, and we largely saw drones being used one-off. If a soldier or a unit had one, they used it. It most often started with reconnaissance. Sometimes even civilians would use them for reconnaissance purposes. As the drones developed more and more lethal capabilities, drone drop munitions, long-range or medium to long-range bombers like the Baba Yaga and Vampire, and then the strike drones, FPV drones, we saw more of a consolidation. So it wasn't an individual soldier responsible for those FPVs, but maybe as part of a platoon or a company. And we have seen that embedded in both the Russian and the Ukrainian units. So it's not just, a random private out there in the front flying drone missions, completely oblivious to the rest of ongoing operations. It has been relatively consolidated. This move recently, in the last couple of years, initiated by Ukraine, now followed by Russia, is an even higher level consolidation, where at the very tippy top of the armed forces, you've got a singular unit, a single command that will help to streamline logistics, the administration, the skill sets needed, the training for certain drone types, and the innovation for new uses on the battlefield. They say reconnaissance and destruction work directly with each other. The operator of the attack drone receives target designation directly from the reconnaissance, can connect to the broadcast himself, and has the ability to hit the target without permission from a higher commander. So I should have added that piece a minute ago. These drone units have been organized top-down for logistics, admin, and training purposes. They can order large batches of drones, much larger than any brigade or battalion might need. And they can organize quality training for the new drone pilots or the drone mechanics or the engineers, whatever it might be. We're not really seeing a top-down directive in terms of the use of drones. That's much further down the chain. It might stop at brigade, battalion, company, or even squad level. So in this case, the Rubicon Group is not giving strike directions to their operators in the field, just like we don't see the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces giving specific directions to their operators carrying out the strikes. I do want to note that the concept of pairing up reconnaissance and strike drones is much easier said than done. It makes common sense. We see a lot of the footage of this playing out on the battlefield, but it's very challenging to have two different types of drones showing up on the same or side-by-side feeds that can really help the strike operator be kind of guided onto target, if you will. They say in total there are 12 detachments from Rubicon, probably in the process of being deployed to regiments, plus detachments from various civil defense forces that are trained at their base, which then return back to their units and not structurally part of the center. So it's not just that somebody comes in and they're Rubicon and they put on the Rubicon patch and they go out and they operate with their Rubicon buddies. In this case, they're operating a bit of a training center as well. So again, the centralized knowledge base inside of the Russian military for drone warfare is with Rubicon. They've got training centers set up all across Russia, maybe even some inside of the occupied territories in Ukraine. Haven't heard details on that. But they're able to pull people into those training sessions, pass along the knowledge base that they have from all across the front, and then send those individual operators back out to the unit. So they're spreading the knowledge, spreading these tactics pretty rapidly across the force. They say inside Rubicon, there are separate detachments that deal with a particular type of UAV, FPV or strike drone, reconnaissance, Lancets, strike aircraft, anti-aircraft gunners. I think interception drones is probably the right way to read that. And a new department for combating unmanned surface vehicles and using unmanned surface vehicles. Plus, they have their own evacuation groups, their own supply service, and analytical center. So supply, medical, analytical, think of Intel center with each one of these groups. My expectation would be that you would have, say, 300, let's go 300 size, 300 strong in one of these detachments. They're probably broken out in maybe to 10 different units in 30 different locations across the front. So somewhat consolidated, maybe in a sector, but they're going to be broken out just like a traditional unit would be as well. A support unit would be. Now, it's interesting that they have the different pilot sets there. FPV requires a different skill set. Flying a wire-guided drone through a trench into a Ukrainian dugout is a different skill set than a long-range Lancet strike against an Ukrainian artillery piece. It's a different skill set than trying to intercept a Ukrainian drone. And they're breaking those out. It's no longer that Joe over there is the dedicated drone pilot no matter what comes in. More and more, we're seeing specific pilots for specific platforms, which is why on both sides of this conflict, you're seeing maneuvers and strikes that were hard to imagine just a few months, let alone years ago. It's because these pilots are becoming very, very, very experienced. They mentioned that there's no mention in this roll-up from Rubicon about unmanned ground vehicles, which is interesting because we're definitely seeing the use of those in Ukraine more and more for medevac and logistics purposes, but it's not even referenced in the Rubicon report here. And I did want to mention, we got a whole section in today's video on the unmanned surface vehicle component. We haven't seen Russia utilize those on the battlefield yet, but they have made a lot of advancements recently in some dedicated units trying to destroy the Ukrainian unmanned surface vehicles like the Magura drone. And just a few days ago, Russia put out some footage showing that they have developed a variety of unmanned surface vessels that could be used to strike Ukrainian coastal targets. Now, before getting into the statistics here, we've actually got some numbers by Rubicon that we're going to compare with the Unmanned Systems Forces of Ukraine. A quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. So USCCA is a national organization with over 860,000 members dedicated to helping responsibly armed Americans avoid danger, save lives, and protect their families. They have countless classes, including self-defense and home defense, first aid, non-lethal self-defense tools, and more. I mean, look at the class schedule here on their website. Just within 50 miles of my home here in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, there are classes nearly every day to include at least a handful that are free. Look, more training is never a bad thing, and usually it can actually be pretty fun. So to find a class near you, check out the link in the description and the pinned comment, and thank you to USCCA for sponsoring today's video. Now, if you go over to the Lost Armor website, a public resource that I'll have linked in the description below, they are tracking the documented strikes carried out by a variety of units in this war, and they have a page dedicated for Rubicon. Rubicon feels comfortable enough with this that they actually promote it. In all of their posts on Telegram, they say, you want to see how we're doing? You want to see what we're up to? Check out this exact page on lostarmor.info. So in documenting their strikes so far, Rubicon says that they have carried out a little more than 24,000 strikes since they've been in operation, which is a big number. But also by comparison, yesterday we went through the Unmanned Systems Forces roll-up for the month of July. And in the month of July, I think it was 23,000 total carried out by Ukraine. So Ukraine's monthly total seems to, at this point, match the Rubicon Group's total since they came into existence. However, we've got some graphs we'll run through here in a second. The Rubicon Group is increasing exponentially in terms of their output. Now, when looking at what they're going after here, and this is where we see a pretty stark difference between Ukraine's focus and their priority targets versus Russia's. The Rubicon Group says 47% of their strikes so far are temporary deployment points, dugouts, buildings, and basements, fortifications. 14% are communications equipment, electronic warfare, reconnaissance assets, antennas, and radars. 13% are vehicles, 8% manpower, and 8% UAVs. So I'm trying to avoid rattling off a bunch of hundreds and thousands of numbers because it just gets confusing here. But the key component I want you to take away from that is their number one thing they're hitting, defensive positions. Number 2, communications equipment. Number 3, vehicles. Number 4, manpower and UAVs are tied. Notably here, in the Rubicon's roll-up, they only went after 1,907 personnel targets on the ground, which is over the course, since they've been in operation, over the course of the last year. That is a very low number. And I got it. 1,907 individual people being targeted is a lot. The comparison here to Midar birds and some of the units in Ukraine, that is a fraction of what these units are striking, often less than what those units are striking in a given month. So it does appear, just based off what we see here, the priority task of Rubicon is to support their infantry. So it's either countering Ukrainian UAVs, going after electronic warfare jammers, or, as is their number one target, striking fortified positions. We're going to get into some of the vehicles here as well. They say also the strikes and logistics, which we saw an example of in Sudza, the first operation where Rubicon played a key role, Sudza being in the Kursk region. They say in statistics, vehicles is the third largest category, with 3,205 vehicles destroyed in the past year. So again, when you look at the priorities here for Russia, we're seeing fortified positions, defensive positions, vehicles, communications equipment, logistics, right? And then the drones, going after the actual drones. When you're looking at tanks, artillery pieces, it is way, way down the list in terms of numbers. Now, I should state that when looking at the Rubicon numbers that they roll out on their website and then the ones they cite on Lost Armor, there's some real mix up there. So it's hard to really exactly understand which numbers they're going with. But high level, a couple stats I was able to pull from there. Again, the Rubicon Group is claiming 1,600 strikes during the month of July, last 30 days. So roughly the month of July. Ukraine, in that same window, 23,433. So 1,600 for Russia, 23,000 for Ukraine in that same window. In personnel, we see that Russia went after 247 personnel in that window, compared with Ukraine's 5,134. So before reading too much into this, I know where people will take this, and they'll say, well, Ukraine is carrying out more drone strikes. Ukraine is winning. They have the upper hand. In this particular instance, drone innovation, the development of drone warfare, especially in the short to medium range, I would say that Ukraine has the advantage in a lot of different ways. The organization here, the training, the development, the structure of these units, and the tracking. I think Ukraine has the upper hand, and I don't think it's even close. And that's why we see just at baseline, the number of strikes being carried out is a fraction inside of Russia right now. Now, the same caveat I added yesterday, that 23,000 strikes carried out by Ukraine is only looking at their dedicated drone units in the Unmanned Systems Forces. The 1,600 strikes carried out by the Rubicon Group is only looking at the Rubicon Group. So it's not all drone strikes across the front. I would expect that what we're probably seeing right now is still a significant number of drone strikes being carried out by other units, and you'll see that decrease as the effectiveness, as the use, as the size of Rubicon increases. So across the board, drone strikes are increasing. I would expect the Rubicon Group to get closer to the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces going forward. It's going to be a while before they surpass them. Now, looking back at some recent data points here, Andrew Perpetua was talking about this group a couple months ago, back in March, where he said, quote, "For weeks, Ukrainian logistics in Kursk have suffered severe damage from drone attacks. These strikes seem to be linked to an organization with the Russian military called the Rubicon Center of Advanced Unmanned Systems, established by Putin in August 2024. In mid-January and early February, Rubicon began releasing videos from Kursk. Initially, they showed occasional footage showing isolated vehicle strikes, but suddenly they started posting large volumes of hits, dozens of destroyed vehicles of all types, including pickup trucks, vans, Max Pros, Bradleys, and BMPs. And today, on the Rubicon page, just like you see on, say, the Ukrainian drone unit pages, it is just a long 5, 6, 7-minute video of strike after strike after strike after strike. So that also has changed drastically. Andrew says, quote, "What is known," and this is back in March, mind you, "is that the Rubicon focuses on 3 main areas: Kursk, Pokrovsk, and Velkonovoselka. Of course, now you can move Kursk out. We do believe they're still operating pretty heavily in Sumy, just across the border from Kursk, but Pokrovsk, in all likelihood, the focus of their attention right now. He says Rubicon employs advanced drone tactics. They often target short sections of road, 100 to 300 meters long, and saturate these areas with drones. Attacks are frequently carried out in groups, sometimes striking the front, back, and sides of a vehicle almost simultaneously. This approach has also been used to hit multiple vehicles in a convoy at once, compounding the damage. They also set traps by landing drones on roads and detonating them under passing vehicles, functioning like anti-tank mines, likely using upwards-facing shaped charges." And something worth mentioning there is when we're looking at these stats, again, Russia and Ukraine, it's apples to oranges. We're trying to compare 1-to-1, but that's not always going to be accurate. So in this example that Andrew just gave of 3 drones hitting one vehicle at once, how is that documented? Is that documented as 1 target hit, or is it documented as 3 strikes carried out? And you see how that can skew data in one direction or the other, and it just depends which metric you're going with here. Additionally, this might come into play when looking at the number of personnel targeted. So let's say that the Rubicon group goes after a Ukrainian pickup truck with 2 people in it. 1 drone strikes the pickup truck and destroys it. Do they mark that as 1 strike, or is it 1 vehicle was targeted, or is it 1 vehicle and 2 personnel were targeted? You see how these numbers can get kind of messy and sloppy pretty quick, even if everybody is trying their absolute best to be honest and genuine and straightforward. It's very hard to do a 1-to-1 comparison with these figures. Andrew says Rubicon's drones are notably difficult to jam. Although they primarily use standard FPV drones, particularly night vision variants, these drones appear to resist common electronic countermeasures. In practice, this makes them more effective than fiber optic drones, which are typically harder to jam but more cumbersome. So again, the bleeding edge of technology in drone warfare is starting with these Rubicon guys. So when you start seeing something pop up on the battlefield you haven't seen before, it's likely here. And if it works, if it's effective, we'll see it spread to more units throughout the Russian military. Very similar in a lot of ways to what Ukraine has been doing for some time now. Darren Massicot, a very impressive Russia analyst, wrote here, kind of adding to this assessment, that Rubicon is an emerging ideal model for the Russian Ministry of Defense. Rubicon receives state investment, does its own research and development, tests with less red tape, trains its own operators, and operates as part of the military but with more independence. Again, every aspect of this new type of warfare that we're seeing, each side gets an advantage for a very short period of time before the other side says, oh, that's a really good idea. And the development of a dedicated drone unit is a perfect example of that. And we can even go deeper and say the fiber optic drone. At the tactical level, we saw Russia roll those out initially in Kursk, and since then, we've seen Ukraine go, well, that is 100% worth doing. And just a few days ago, Ukraine rolled out, I want to say, a 40-kilometer-plus range fiber optic drone. So Russia had that complete advantage for a period of time, and now Ukraine has come out with something at or better than the Russian version. The organization of these unmanned systems forces began in Ukraine. And Ukraine, I would argue, still today has the upper hand in the organization piece of that. Russia is picking up on it as well. And according to Dara here, this is probably one of the best moves that the Russian military has made to date. Now, I did say we were going to get into these unmanned surface vehicles, which drone boats, again, this is an area that Ukraine has led the charge from the beginning because they needed to, and Russia didn't need to. It's not really that big of a surprise. It's crazy technology to put these together and strap some Starlinks on top, and Ukraine now has a couple different variants, from ones with explosive warheads, the version 5. We've got version 6, 7, and I think a Whaler version or a W version that have anti-aircraft missiles, surface-to-surface, or I guess sea-to-surface in this case, rockets, and MLRS platform. Ukraine needed to make that move because they did not have a navy really to speak of. Russia did not need to go that direction because they, for the most part, still have a navy. We're seeing Russia start to catch up in this regard, and United 24 just put out an article a couple days ago saying, quote, "Inside Rubicon, elite Russian drone unit trains suicide vessels for future naval attacks." They quote Ukrainian military expert Beskontrov, no way I got that right, who said that Russia's Rubicon unit may soon pose a serious threat to Ukraine's coastal and port infrastructure. And we're seeing Russian units already start to share, or the Rubicon Group, share some footage of the testing of these weapon systems. That expert here says, quote, "Rubicon is getting the best specialists and priority weapons. Their unmanned boats could become a truly dangerous front. There's also concern that Russia may be attempting to replicate Ukraine's tactics that combine naval drones with FPV launches from the water." That was something we actually got a chance to talk with one of the operators in the 73rd Special Operations Center a few weeks ago, where they carried out that operation in Crimea. They launched quadcopter bomber drones from unmanned surface vessels near the coast and took out 3, 4, 5 expensive Russian radar systems. Much harder to track. The reason that was so effective is the radar systems in that portion of Crimea are looking for big things like aircraft and missiles, long-range missiles that show up on certain radars. They weren't looking for small little quadcopter drones, so they snuck in quietly and inflicted a pretty significant amount of damage. That same issue would hold true in, say, Odessa, where they're looking for missiles and large drones. A lot of their radars and detection techniques are probably not focused on small quadcopters or FPVs. So this does appear to be a direction that the Rubicon Group, or the Russia through the Rubicon Group, is starting to go. But hopefully that was a quick kind of once-over, an idea of this organization. I have a feeling we're going to hear more and more about these guys. We are seeing not quite yet the majority, but a lot of the drone footage coming out of Russia right now has the Rubicon watermark on it, which means that they're taking more and more of the burden of strikes across the front. But nonetheless, that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.